John Kummings. So during Sandy, I was actually a principal. What year was Sandy? Real quick.
October 29, 2012.
Okay, yep. So I was still principal at Glenwood Avenue Elementary School. So I was still working for Wildwood Public Schools, just in a different title. We usually, as a district, if we know that there's going to be water and any kind of challenging weather, depending on what it is, we'll get ready with whatever resources we have available. So with Sandy, we have certain areas of basically the elementary schools where the lowest elevation is for us. So we would fill sandbags, and did you guys both go there?
I did.
So that hallway that's on Magnolia Avenue, where the stairwell comes down, that fills up with water during storms sometimes. So we usually take sandbags and we sandbag those back doors. There's a couple entrances that we might be worried about, so we'll always sandbag those. That'll stop some of the water that's like blowing up against the building, but once it gets taller than those points, it'll eventually seep into the building. So that's really the only mechanism we had to prepare for it, other than just be smart and monitor it to see if there's anything else that's needed. So it did not affect me and my immediate family. It did affect some of my relatives outside of my home. So I had family on other barrier islands in Margate, Ventnor, I had friends in Ocean City that were really impacted from it. So I have we had members of our family that were completely displaced from their home. They had 6 or 7 inches of water come into their house, ruin all their furniture, their carpets, their floors. And then other friends had similar situations where they weren't even able to live in their homes after that for quite some time. I did not. I live more on the mainland. I'm not on an island, so we benefited from that. We did not. We were lucky. If you remember how that storm tracked, and we've had a lot of storms, so off memory, that storm, the worst of it was just north of us. So as you got closer, into the Ocean City area and up into North Jersey, that's where the worst damage was. So we were very lucky that we just had a lot of water on the island without any real damage that required notification to the insurance company. I think what happened is that we've gotten more prepared for it. If you look at our first responders on the island, I think they have some different strategies, and they're always trying to think of things that they may not be prepared for, which is something everybody should understand, how much thought and training goes into that. So if you look at some of the equipment that our fire and police department have now, they have some of those old military trucks, North Wildwood has a military truck that's all-wheel drive that they actually put one of their fire engines on so that they can take it into flooded streets and rescue people. They came up with different systems to get people off of the island if they need to get off the island in those situations where they can kind of shuttle them. So if anything, I think we're just better prepared because every experience in this community with the first responders and the schools, we learn from that so that if something happens like that again, we're prepared to respond appropriately. So what I would do differently, and I'm going back to when I was a principal at that school, we never thought water would come up to, if you think about the Glenwood Avenue side of the building, where the courtyard is, so those first grade classrooms, Mrs. Lee's old room, where Mrs. Carter is now. Actually, that's not Mrs. Lee's old room. It's where Mrs. Carter is now, and then Mrs. Lee's old room is on the other side. So those two rooms are 3-4 steps up. Well, I was getting images because at the time, Mrs. DeMeo lived right across the street, so she would text us what was happening. And the water was all the way up to the bottom of those doorways for Glenwood Avenue. And we have so much technology and resources and simple stuff like carpets on the floor for the students. So if we knew we were going to have a weather event like that was going to bring that much water on the island, I think what I would do is figure out how we can, excuse me, elevate some of our technology. So I think in preparing for that, I would have gone and like work with our team to get all the computers off the ground, because we had like towers that were on the ground for like the computers for the teachers. Any resources, books, materials, I would try to elevate as much as possible in the older section of the building that sits lower. And I would look to do the same thing over here if that was something that we were worried about over here. But we've been lucky because this building does sit a little higher as far as the elevation and the island goes, so we haven't had that situation. I don't remember when I became aware of that. So I can tell you, I used to really love snow days up until I took on the job as superintendent. So you have to learn how to be a meteorologist real quickly and try and figure out what's out there so that you can make good decisions. And sometimes, more often than not, storms are hyped up more than they actually turn out to be. Once in a while, they're underhyped, and that happened to me one time. So, like, we didn't think we needed to make any change to the calendar, and then all of a sudden we had 4 inches of snow on the ground by 7:15 in the morning without a lot of warning. So it's very challenging to really predict what's going to happen. Like, there's this phenomenon that people talk about. They call it the Cape May bubble. Like, a lot of times it seems like because of water temperatures and the weather systems that are around the barrier islands and in our areas, they impact whatever storm system's coming through. So, like, anyone that's worked here for a while, like, you always think you know what's going to happen because you're watching the meteorologists on the news and you're watching maps, but it's rarely what you have predicted is going to happen. So I think I've been right twice in 8 years. So it'd be the same way. Like, our preparation is making sure that we're able to notify everyone that school is going to be open or closed or delayed. So we go through our databases. We make sure that everybody has contact information. We make sure that our emergency messages are recorded. So that's important because you have to have, like, for every scenario, you have to have a message ready to go. We like to have all our communications in English and Spanish so that the community is able to access them. So a lot of our work is around that. And then outside of that, it comes down to our facilities department. Like, does our plow work? Have our snow blowers been started? Do we have enough snow shovels? Is our whole custodial and facilities team aware that we're probably going to be in and digging out if that's the case? If we don't have enough help, sometimes we're shorthanded. We have a really great relationship with the city, so their public works department, like, even this year, they've helped out a lot with storms. So we want to make sure that all those pieces are ready in place and we're ready to communicate so that everybody's going to be able to be safe. So we're either going to close and we're going to be safe, or we're going to have a delay and we're going to, like, make sure we're prepped so that we can then open and be safe, or we're going to open and be safe. So that's mainly the plan. You're always coming from an angle of, like, what's the safest thing to do for all the staff and the students. It's really just that. It's like making sure, like, we have the resources to be open when we can be open. As far as personally goes, my channel, I don't remember how much snow we got at my own personal residence, but that's always a challenge for me, is to get dug out wherever I am, because I'm about 30 miles away from here, and then I have to get here and make sure everything is the way it should be. I did not. And the school did not either. So really, that's at the city level, the evacuation plans. We haven't been in a situation where we're in session with the staff and the students in the buildings, and then we have to evacuate because of a weather event. So we have protocols, obviously, in place, which you guys know. We drill them every month to evacuate our buildings if we have to, but actually evacuating and getting off the island, that's really somewhere where fire and police get involved, and they have a system in place for that. Well, Superstorm Sandy was really what you would consider, like, I believe they were calling it a 100-year storm. It's just something that doesn't happen often. The amount of water and the amount of damage that happened on the barrier islands, I think, is what set Sandy apart. So we had faculty members that were completely out of their residence for a while. Their, like, whole first floor had sand in them if they lived, like, in Ocean City or one of those towns, like, north of where we are. And I think that's the real difference. And then as far as our role in that, we've always just tried to be flexible, like, with whatever situation's going on. Like, if we have students and their families having an issue, or if we have faculty and our faculty live all over South Jersey, like if they have an issue personally because of a storm or a life event, as a school district, we're always flexible and supportive in trying to help them get through whatever's happening. So that was a scenario where I know that faculty were helping each other, and we were looking for resources to help everybody get back on their feet and back into their homes. So I think that's what's really different. It was just so devastating for so many people. I think people are going to remember Sandy for a long time. I mean, that was a scenario where in Brigantine you had the President of the United States fly in and meet with the Governor of New Jersey. Brigantine's only about 50 miles north of where we are now, and that's the difference. Like, the boardwalks were completely torn up and destroyed, beaches were destroyed, homes were destroyed, to the point where the President of the United States came to New Jersey to acknowledge that and try to identify support and funding to fix that. So I would say yes, because I think we always think back to how we could do things better. There's always going to be things when you're dealing with nature that you're not prepared for, because you're not sure what and why something's going to happen. I think as far as what our responsibilities are as a school district, I would package the COVID pandemic in with that also, because if we have power and internet, if something happens to our schools, we're able now to continue to learn and educate students without our buildings. We learned we can do that. It's not as good as being in our buildings. It's way better being here, but it's better than not having anything at all. So I think with those two events and some of the lessons we've learned through the pandemic, that we're prepared for the majority of things that could happen. But again, the weather's always changing. There's always things that are going to happen that you're not prepared for because you haven't seen them before. I believe, I'm not sure which storm it was, but we had a lot of snow that melted and became ice, and then we had flooding. Do you remember what storm that was, where it was glaciers moving in between the houses?
Oh no, was that when you were principal at Glenwood, or was that
I'm not sure what my role was. Everything kind of blends together at this point. But it was a snowstorm that put enough snow and ice on the ground that when the flooding came through, it picked it up off the ground. So it's just, I think there's always going to be new things that you're not prepared for and challenges that you're not prepared for. But the best you can do is try to be creative and anticipate things that you can kind of imagine could happen and prepare for those. So I'll give you another example of that. Our board president is the chief of the fire department, Mr. Troiano, Chief Troiano. So they'll do I think they call it fast moving water rescue. So that's not something that happens a lot around here. That's usually something that happens around rivers, that after a lot of rain, the rivers fill up and they move faster. And sometimes people get stranded or their car gets stuck, and then people have to go out and rescue them. And there's a specific way to do that. Well, every once in a while you have that happen here, where you might have flooding waters or something on the back bays. And our fire department actually goes and does these drills and prepares and trains that way for the times that might happen. So I think if we always have that mentality that we're always trying to sharpen our sword and be prepared for things that could happen so that we can make people safer and respond to these things, I think we're going to be in the best situation we can be. And that's really the mentality with the school district, the fire department, the police department, and our city hall. So that's something for everybody to take away. I have excuse me, I have a unique perspective on that because I interact with all these different entities, and that's really everybody's commitment to the people, which is something to be proud of. I'm really not the one to speculate on that. I think that when it comes to things of science and climate and whatever it might be, I think you got to rely on the scientists to make those determinations. I think that there's a natural rhythm of the planet, which we know about as far as heating and cooling, and we also know that humankind has its own impact with burning fossil fuels, what we do with plastics, what we've caused with water quality, etc. But everything that I read is from scientific information, so I wouldn't want to try to pretend that I'm an authority that could really weigh in on a comment like that. I think they could get more severe depending on what they are and what's happening with the climate.
Do you think humans had an impact on climate change?
I think that they have, but I just don't know how to measure that. So I know that like I said before, like we burn fossil fuels, we do things of that nature, but also volcanoes erupt, and they cause a lot of pollution in their own way. So again, like I'm not sure, like I'm not really the authority to make an opinion on whether or not like we've moved the needle on that or not. I'm not sure. But I mean, it's definitely, there's the possibility for anything to happen. That said, I still think that our behavior impacts air quality, it impacts water quality. Like if you look at some of the information from the pandemic, from COVID-19 and the lockdowns that happened, because there was so much less air travel and car travel, we're able to measure air quality, and we saw that like air quality improved substantially around the globe because of we were just moving less. The amount of plastics that they find in the water, like from our use of plastics and the way that we dispose of or fail to dispose of plastics and don't recycle them well, that's a real thing. So I think those pieces are definitely measurable. How they impact climate, I'm not sure. But we definitely have an impact. We definitely have like a footprint on this planet as humans.